moment for everyone to be let in from the waiting room. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right. And with that, I see it is 9:01, so we're just going to get this on the road here. So first, I want to welcome everyone who has joined us to the March 6th, 2024 MAPC Winter Council meeting. I'm thrilled that you have taken the time to join us. I know it's an incredibly busy time of year for everyone, but I really appreciate everyone who has taken the time to do so. Members of council, as this is a council meeting, members of council are being checked in as they enter the meeting for roll call to assess quorum. So I'm going to ask if you would please, council members, to please rename yourself with your full name and affiliation. So for me, it is Erin Wortman for Stoneham. And if quorum is achieved by the time the secretary finishes answering questions, speaking and answering questions, it will not be necessary to call the roll. So that's a nice little bonus. And if quorum has not been achieved at that time, Margie from MAPC will call members who have not yet been marked as present. So with that, I know that everyone came here not to hear me talk, but instead our keynote speaker. So I'm going to call on Executive Director Mark Drayson to introduce the secretary. Mark.
Erin, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Pleasure to see you here, even on the screen. It is my pleasure to introduce the Secretary of the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, Ed Augustus. I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with Ed in many different roles over the years. As I think you know, he served in the Massachusetts State Senate, also for many years as city manager of Worcester, our second largest city in New England, and then also as president of Dean College before joining the administration to head up HLC. One of the significant things is that he is the first, I guess I would say, secretary of the modern era for a housing executive office in Massachusetts. Long time ago, there was the executive office of communities and development, but then it was subsumed within economic development, and there it remained for about 20 or 30 years. Recently, at the governor's recommendation, we enacted a new secretariat for housing and livable communities, and Secretary Augustus is the first secretary of that organization. He comes to us here today to speak a little bit about the Affordable Homes Act and some other objectives and priorities of HLC as we all seek to manage the really serious housing crisis and shortage that we are dealing with throughout Massachusetts, and particularly in the greater Boston region. So it is my pleasure to introduce Secretary Ed Augustus.
Well, thank you, Mark, for that generous introduction, and good morning, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you this morning. You know, as Mark said, we have not had a standalone housing secretary for about 30 years. We had a combined economic development and housing secretariat. And when Governor Healy was running 2 years ago, literally every corner of the state that she would go to, no matter the audience, it could be a business group, it could be a labor group, it could be a tenants' rights group, it could be a social service provider group, everybody said that their top issue was housing. It was challenging their abilities to run their businesses, their organizations, because of the cost and lack of availability of housing was creating threats to their very existence, their ability to deliver the services or conduct their business here in Massachusetts. And so she determined that we needed, at this moment of this housing crisis, to have somebody at the cabinet level who's focused specifically on housing, and that would assemble a team and come up with some ideas for moving us forward in terms of accelerating the production of housing, particularly affordable housing, as well as preserving the units that we do have. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So June 1st, the Secretariat was stood up. June 1st was the day I started as Secretary. I gathered what I think is a very talented team of folks, stole one from MAPC, and I'm sorry for that, but I'm happy for myself because Tim's terrific. But I think we did assemble a very strong team, and we quickly went to work, reaching out to stakeholder groups. We met with more than 120 stakeholder groups. And we decided that a piece of basic housekeeping business, the reauthorization of our capital spending programs, or the bond authorization for housing programs, which has to be done every 5 years, we decided we would take that vehicle and we would try to push the envelope on the amount of authorization we were asking for. So we asked for $4.1 billion, which is 2.5 times larger than the previous bond authorization. So it does things like tripling the amount of capital investments in public housing capital needs. We doubled the Affordable Housing Trust Fund from $400 million to $800 million. We nearly doubled the Housing Stabilization Fund. So the Affordable Housing Trust, the housing stabilization, are two of our biggest tools to build new affordable units across the state. And then we said we'd do something fairly unusual, which is put 28 outside sections or 28 policy proposals attached to the bond bill, because we had that sense of urgency that we couldn't wait for another vehicle. The bond bill had to be passed. We wanted these things to work in concert with each other, the expanded authorizations and the policy changes. And that's what became known as the Affordable Homes Act. And again, I want to thank MAPC for their testimony and support of the bill. I think many on the call have also in your various capacities supported this legislation, and we appreciate that. Good news is the Monday of this week, the Housing Committee voted that bill favorably out of the Housing Committee after a marathon 11-hour hearing. And Mark was in the legislature. I was in the legislature. We've had long hearings. I don't remember an 11-hour hearing, but more importantly, an 11-hour hearing where only one entity testified in opposition to the bill, and the rest of the 11 hours was in favor of the bill. Some folks had tweaks here and there, but overall very much supportive of what's in that bill, which I think is part of the reason it's moved out of the committee with no amendments and changes now before the bonding committee. We're hoping for a quick hearing there, and then on to either the House or Senate floor for action, with the goal of getting this done before the end of the legislative session in July, and hopefully even before that if possible. And I want to just mention the Affordable Homes Act, I think, is so consequential. It's been called the most historic housing legislation maybe ever in Massachusetts, or certainly since 40B. The dollar amounts are significant, but so are the policy recommendations, things like making ADUs as of right, accessory dwelling units. Many other states around the country have done this. California in recent years has done that. They've created tens of thousands of units of new housing in California with that one policy change. We've conservatively estimated that between 8,000 and 10,000 units of housing could be created in the first 5 years with that one change alone, at no cost to the Commonwealth. And so, we think the moment, given the magnitude of the crisis, the way it's manifesting itself, whether it be, as I mentioned, our challenges around competitiveness when we get some talented young person who's graduating from one of our colleges and universities, they get an offer from a Massachusetts employer, and they get an offer from a North Carolina employer, same dollar amount. And yet here they're going to spend 50% of their income on housing, and in North Carolina, they're going to spend 30%. Too often we're losing that talent to other places. And, if you think about it, we've invested a lot in these young people, often in K-12 education, our public higher education system, and then we're exporting that talent to other states. That's a dumb public policy. And Massachusetts is not a dumb state. So what we need to do is align our priorities, our policies, so that we have the kind of outcomes that, make sense and are good, smart public policy, which means keeping the talent that we have, keeping the talent that we attract from all around the world to our great colleges and universities who fall in love with Massachusetts. We want them to grow their careers and their families here, contribute to our economy, but they need an affordable place to live. And, if you think about it, the power dynamic in our housing space is all upside down. When you have things that are in such short supply and in high demand, the power dynamic is whoever's got what's in short supply has all the power. And whoever needs that or wants that has no power. And that manifests itself in the ownership space, where you see homes go on the market and you get swarms of people at the first open house. You get multiple over asking offers on that property. And then after, people come up short multiple times, they start to scratch their head and say, well, maybe home ownership isn't an option for me, or at least not in Massachusetts. And again, we don't want to lose those people. Or, maybe there's a single mom who's desperate to stay somewhat close to where they work, so that they have some work-life balance, but just cannot afford a place to live that allows them to do that. And, those are the challenges. That's the way it manifests itself. We need to restore some of the power balance in our housing ecosystem. And some of that is just creating more supply. And that's why we think that there's really three key strategies that in concert, not by themselves, but in concert with each other, we're going to be able to do that. One is what happened over the summer when the governor signed and the legislature passed the $1 billion tax bill. There were two important components in that tax bill related to housing. The low-income housing tax credits were increased from $40 million a year to $60 million a year. And the HDIP tax credits that are for market rate housing production in gateway cities went from 10 million to 30 million a year, with a one-time 57 million that deals with the backlog. So those increases in tax credits, combined with the authorizations and the policy changes in the Affordable Homes Act, and very importantly, implementation of the MBTA Communities Act, removing some of the historic barriers that are put up in some communities that really have, in some places, seen very little housing produced in 20, 30 years in some of these communities because of these barriers. The previous administration and legislature, passed that law. The implementation falls on this administration, and we are very aggressively working to be partners with cities and towns. We've put out over $6 million worth of grants and technical assistance to nearly all of the 177 MBTA communities to try to help them get to compliance. And the good news, and the focus tends to be on whoever's not in compliance, and I get that. But the good news and the important news, don't bury the lead. Most communities are working hard. They're having tough conversations. They're having tough meetings, but they are working toward compliance and toward really abiding by the spirit of the law, which is how do we take down some barriers to housing production, particularly close to our transit locations, that is good for our environment, is good for the quality of life, and is good to meet the needs of our workforce and people who, otherwise we're in danger of losing here in Massachusetts if we don't create more supply. So we really see those three things in concert as helping move the needle on housing production. Now, there are things that are outside our control, like interest rates that have significantly slowed down some of the housing production. There were a number of deals that were kind of moving through the process of design and permitting and that worked when people could access 4% interest rates, but don't work when interest rates are 7 or 8%. And so we have in the Affordable Homes Act something called the Momentum Fund, which would be about $50 million of state money, that would look to be leveraged by investments from endowments, from retirement funds, from other sources to combine with the state dollars that could take equity positions in deals that otherwise are ready to go, except for the high interest rates. And we might be able to take a 4% return versus an 8% return, which is what the market may be demanding at this moment, and get some of those projects back on track and move that forward. And hopefully, with a little luck toward the end of this year, we'll see some interest rate reductions start happening, and that would put wind at our back and make more and more deals able to be moving forward. We know the demand is there. We just need to access the capital. And we try to address that with the Affordable Homes Act. And then if overall, economic forces align, that's going to help us move things forward. So with that, I probably should stop and maybe answer some questions because I want to make sure I give you all some time to ask questions, things you're curious about. But I wanted to give just a high-level overview of how we're approaching this housing crisis, how we see these three critical pieces kind of working in concert. And, there's a lot of work to be done. But again, most of the work is not being done at 100 Cambridge Street where I'm sitting. Most of the work is being done at planning boards, at town meetings, at boards of selectmen. And that's where, we want to be partners with folks who, want to work on creating more housing, specifically housing in places that make sense in terms of advancing our climate goals, our quality of life, and really meeting the needs of the people that we're all, at the end of the day, here to serve. So with that, I'll open it up.
Great. Thank you so much, Secretary. I really appreciate it. I'm sure I can speak for the council when we say we appreciate you taking time and really kind of giving us some insight on that. How we're going to format, just for those in the meeting, how we're going to do this is I'm going to ask people to put their questions in the chat, just because there's a bit of a lag when it comes to allowing people to unmute and do that sort of thing. And we want to get as many questions together as possible. So not to, put you on the spot or, have you pick a favorite child, but I guess I'll ask the first question because I can. What is one part of the Affordable Homes Act that you're most excited about? Like, what makes you personally super excited about the Affordable Homes Act, like one aspect?
Yeah, that probably will get me in trouble. I really do think that there are a lot of, I think, really good, cool ideas. I think accessory dwelling units, honestly, is low-hanging fruit. The other 5 New England states have already done this. So I know people have concerns, but they've not been borne out in other places. And if you think about it, it works on so many levels. How many of us know maybe an elderly person in a community who, have raised their kids, maybe their spouse has passed away, they're living in a 3-bedroom house. They want to stay in their community. They want to stay next to their faith community. They want to stay near everybody and everything they know and care about, but there's just nowhere to move. There's no options that really work for them. Creating accessory dwelling units is a way for them to stay in that community and then downsize and make that 3-bedroom house available for a family that's growing that needs that much space. And so what we've seen is very little churn in the housing space. Part of it is, again, the interest rates, right? If you've got a 3% interest rate on your mortgage, you're not anxious to go out there and get a 6% mortgage. And so until we see some of these things change, we're not seeing the normal churn. I kind of think about it as life cycle housing. If you think about what you were looking for when you were getting out of college, maybe with a couple of roommates, was different than you were looking for when you were getting married, starting your family, is different than what you're looking for when you're kind of empty nesters and looking to age in place. What we need to do is make sure that we have sufficient housing in every one of those life cycles here in Massachusetts, so you can do all of that here. You don't have to say, well, I have to go somewhere else at this phase of my life because there are no housing options for me. So I think the ADUs really does kind of create some kind of movement. I know it can work for many families who maybe have a disabled child or a family member they want close. Maybe it's a senior family that wants a little extra income because they're on a fixed income, but with an ADU, they could bring in additional income and maybe stay in that house longer. So it just gives folks options that I think makes a lot of sense given where we are.
Right. And I'm going to just kind of ask questions as they appear in the chat, but since you talked about accessory dwelling units, with the accessory dwelling units being as of right, subject to reasonable regulations, do you foresee that it'll be EOHLC that will create rules similar or, guidance or guidelines similar to 3A, which will define those reasonable regulations?
Yeah, I think that's typically the process. We would promulgate draft guidelines. There'd be a comment period. Folks could weigh in, say, make sure you take this into account. Hey, this wouldn't work in this circumstance. I know when 3A guidelines were rolled out, there were a number of changes that were made based on that feedback. And that's, again, good public policy. There's always things that the legislature couldn't have thought of, or an agency that's drafting guidelines doesn't think of, but in that comment period, there's an ability to make sure we're taking into account various circumstances. I know one thing that we've heard from a lot of places, and I think would be very inclined to support, is preventing, if a community wanted to prevent accessory dwelling units from being used as Airbnbs or other short-term rentals. That's one of the challenges that's happened on the Cape with their workforce rental housing. A lot of that evaporated because instead of renting it, to a preschool teacher, a DPW employee, or somebody who works in a hotel motel on the Cape, it's being rented by the week or by the weekend as an Airbnb. And half of the Cape's workforce now lives off the Cape. So think about that, like how challenging that is to just deliver basic municipal services or the kind of services that's the lifeblood of the economy of the Cape: tourism, travel, restaurants, hotels. If people have to come off the Cape over those bridges every day to work because there's no rental housing available to them, how long is that sustainable? And so I think there are things like that that we've heard from folks that we'd probably want to give local municipalities some flexibility to be able to do if they thought that made sense for them. Great,
thank you. So many great questions in the chat, and I'm going to try and get to all of them, but let's pivot away from ADUs for a minute. And there's a question about the HDIP program. And is there consideration to make the HDIP program open to non-gateway communities? And with the Momentum Fund, will that also be open to non-gateway communities, cities, mostly? Yeah,
so right now, HDIP is limited to the gateway cities. That's in statute, so the legislature would have to change that. I have not heard any effort at this moment to go in and change that and open that up. I think that's maybe something that could be talked about in the near future, or particularly if we see the kind of traction with these new dollars creating units in our gateway cities. But as of right now, there's no effort to do that. On the Momentum Fund would be open to projects in any of the 351 cities and towns. It's not restricted to gateway communities.
Great, thank you so much. Let's talk about, I guess, the elephant that's always in the room with us, 3A. There's a question here. What progress is HLC making in reviewing economic feasibility analysis, or EFAs, to allow affordable housing requirements over 10%, up to 20% for MBTA community zoning?
Yeah, I know we've had a lot of communities that I think sometimes, maybe often, trying to do the right thing and say we want as much affordability as possible through an inclusionary zoning ordinance. There is the reality, though, there is some point where it becomes a barrier. It becomes just economically infeasible. And so we want to try to help work with communities to strike the right balance. Yes, get as much affordable as possible, but don't require so much that it makes the projects financially unaffordable. And so, that's going to be nuanced. Different communities are going to have different kind of tipping points, if you will. So we want to look at the economic analysis community by community so that we can make, good, smart, informed decisions without having, one size fits all. Or, quite honestly, we don't want this to become a tool to really prevent development by saying, oh, we're even more for affordable. We want 40% or 50%. And it has the unintended, or maybe in the case of some folks, the intended consequence of preventing any developments from moving forward because it's just financially infeasible.
Right. Speaking of striking that balance, while a lot of communities, hopefully all, are doing our part to increase housing supply, what else can we be doing or advocating for to make sure we're not just building homes for investors, we're actually building for the people who we're intending to build for? I think it's an important kind of perspective to have because so many of us locally are trying to, do the right thing, build that housing supply, and making sure it goes to the intended target.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I think one of the reasons we supported a transfer fee, which is somewhat controversial in this bill, the transfer fee would give cities and towns the ability, if they chose to opt in, so it's, again, some will and some won't, they could put a small surcharge on the transfer of land as it's written right now over $1 million. So if a property sold for $1.2 million, the 200,000 above $1 million would be subject to the transfer fee. And it could be 0.5%, 1%, or up to 2%, depending again on what each individual community decided. And they get to keep that money. State doesn't take any of that money. We just give them the ability to do that. And one of the reasons we think that's important is because there's something called naturally occurring affordable housing. Right? There's housing that exists right now that the government has had no, involvement in, no subsidies in. It is relatively affordable because the owner has chosen to keep it affordable. Maybe it's a family that owns a multi-unit apartment building in a given town, and they've got good tenants, and they try to keep the rents reasonable and keep the same tenants in place because that works for them. What we see is when those properties turn over, often we get speculators, we get folks from out of town, we get corporations and others that come in and buy these up and then jack up the prices. And there's not a lot we can do as a state to prevent that. What we thought a tool in the hands of cities and towns, they could decide to work with a CDC or a not-for-profit to either purchase that property or purchase an affordability restriction on that property so that they can keep those affordable units affordable. The cities and towns can act more nimbly than the state would be able to. When a property in your city or town is going to be up for sale, is going to change hands, when the opportunity is, as opposed to when we're offering a funding round and going through applications and that whole process. We want cities and towns to be as nimble as possible and to have some new resources to be able to protect that naturally occurring affordable housing. So, we're going to be doing everything we can to create more affordable housing with all the tools I talked about. But it's tough when we're pouring water in the bucket from one end, but the bucket is springing holes because this naturally occurring affordable housing is increasingly disappearing. And a lot of times because of speculators or developers or folks from, all around the country, in some cases around the world, seeing opportunities to get a quick return on purchasing some of these units.
Right. And unfortunately, we only have time for one more question. I want to first thank everyone who's participated in the chat. Our chat is going to be saved. So if your question is not answered this morning, hopefully we can get some of those answers to you. So the last one, last question we're going to ask, we're going to pivot just a little bit more to collaboration and transportation. The question is HLC working in concert with the Massachusetts agencies concerned with transportation, for example, regular bus service like the MWRTA, to enable practical livability of MBTA housing in small adjacent communities? If not, what more do you think can be done about that?
Well, there's obviously a lot of work and a lot of discussion going on about how to fund our transportation needs in Massachusetts. The governor just recently appointed a commission that is going to make recommendations by the end of the year, how to provide additional resources to support what we all want to do, which is a better, more reliable T system, as well as regional transit and other transportation elements, so that it is a system that supports and works in concert with each other. I'm on that commission. The governor appointed me to be part of that conversation. Secretary Tibbetts-Nutt, who's the Secretary of Transportation, and I meet on a monthly basis. We talk about particular projects. Part of the MBTA communities, I should say the Affordable Homes Act, calls for a streamlining of the surplusing of state property process. And we are working with DCAM and other state agencies to do some mapping about where there are state properties that are surplus, particularly properties owned by the T or Mass DOT that are in the locations that, we want housing, that communities are zoning for housing. What do we have for state assets within those footprints that we can quickly dispose of for purposes of producing housing, particularly affordable housing? So we are really working closely, not only on how to improve and really make sure it's a system. It's not separate lines or separate aspects, but it's a transportation system that allows you to move around and connect with different elements of it, but also that it's smart development, that we're putting our housing near where those transportation nodes are. And so we are working very closely in a couple of those ways.
Well, Secretary, thank you so much for your time, insight, and expertise this morning. I'll speak for the council and say I know we all very much appreciate it. And I hope everyone has really valued the conversation here this morning. So thank you, Secretary Augustus.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much. So next up, next up, we're going to, we are going to hear from Andrea, Leah, and Jesse. They will be doing a presentation on MAPC's housing research, planning, and advocacy, something I think that is all at the top of our minds. So with that, I'm going to introduce Andrea Harris-Long, who's the Manager of Housing and Neighborhood Development, Leah Robbins, the Director of Government Affairs, and Jesse Partridge-Greeno, Interim Director of Data Services at MAPC, to give us a great presentation. Take it away.
Amazing. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I am, as always, really exciting to get to hear from the Secretary. Again, my name is Leah Robbins. I run the Government Affairs team at MAPC. I'm going to kick us off a little bit on this panel and then turn it over to Andrea. Hearing the Secretary talk is always really exciting because there's so much overlap with what MAPC has been asking for so many years, and to see it filed by the administration and see them really leading on a lot of these housing priorities is quite exciting. And we're doing a lot on the Government Affairs team to try to support those measures and make sure there are ways for municipalities to make sure our voices, that your voices are all heard at the conversation table that the legislature is setting, and that we're all able to make sure that those small tweaks, if there are any needed, are being raised as well. So there's 6 real top priorities that MAPC has been pushing for within the Affordable Homes Act that we were so excited to see move from committee on Monday. The legislature seemed like they might be taking a lot longer to review the bill, and then they moved it out on Monday. So we're really hopeful that that quick process will continue through the legislature so that we'll be able to work out the differences that we know are going to happen between the two branches. Getting a bill to move with no changes is a rare and beautiful feat. We'll see what happens next. But some of the top priorities that we're pushing for really align with what you heard the Secretary speak about. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund and Housing Stabilization and Investment Fund, those two workhorse programs that really fund so many of the developments that are happening in our communities. The Public Housing Modernization Funding, right? We have so much public housing in Massachusetts, more than any other state. And we really need to make sure our investments are keeping up with those units so that folks living in them can have a beautiful life in those units. And then we've really been working a lot on the local option transfer fee legislation and trying to make sure that that option for communities is preserved in the bill. And municipalities, many in our region, have filed individual home rules that we are also supportive of as an agency. So working with those communities to make sure that they're getting the support they need as the bill is moving forward. And also looking at accessory dwelling units by right. One thing that was really exciting to me, and I think many folks on this call, is when the administration filed accessory dwelling units by rights, they included mention of parking. No one else thinks about parking as much as MAPC does. So it was very cool to see a discussion of tying that to, when you're near transit, how much parking is needed and making sure those things are connected. It's all about land use and all about where people can build those homes. And this is really, these advocacy priorities are coming out of our work with communities that Andrea is going to speak a little bit more about. But I just wanted to give you that sort of broad overview of some of our top priorities. I do want to note too that we are also working very deeply on our family shelter system here in Massachusetts and working in coalition with other organizations to make sure that we are lifting up the need for funding for that system that is supporting shelters in so many communities across our region and beyond. We know that system is over capacity right now, has been at capacity and over capacity for a number of years. And as a secretary, you heard the secretary mention later today, the House is going to move on a supplemental budget that will include funding for that system through the end of this fiscal year. And that includes some changes to how the House is thinking about running that system, including some restrictions on how long families would be able to stay in those units. So it's something we're watching very closely and having many conversations with different communities about what that might look like. So very curious to have the conversation with all of you about both our longer term housing system and also our emergency shelter system. I think both of those are really top of mind, and also the individual, the sheltering for individuals, which we know is a separately funded and separately managed system that we're working really closely on. So I'm just going to leave it there. I could talk a lot longer about different housing priorities that we're working on and the coalitions that we're working with. None of this happens alone. And I think we're really privileged in Massachusetts to have a number of organizations and municipalities really working deep on these issues and providing feedback and comments. So I'm going to leave it there and turn next to Andrea.
Thanks, Leah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrea Harris-Long, the manager of our Housing and Neighborhood Development Division. It's wonderful to be with you all this morning talking about my favorite topic, housing. And so I think that, as the secretary set the stage for all of the exciting state policy and funding that is going towards this very pressing crisis that we're in, it's also important to think about where, this can support the housing work that's happening at the local level. And we do really see that the Affordable Homes Act is critical to supporting the work that you all are doing in your communities to address the local housing needs that you have. And so we always, have to talk about MBTA communities because that is the thing that's most pressing at the local level right now, with most of you having your adoption deadline this year. And we just wanted to take a minute to really first thank you all for doing the work that you're doing. We know that the news has been focusing on the communities where maybe they are having a little bit more struggle, but we also want to recognize that almost 50 communities have either already adopted their zoning, they are very close to adopting zoning, or are in that review and approval process with the HLC. So thank you for doing the work that you're doing to advance MBTA communities. we are here to help you. We really see our role as helping the state, like was mentioned, the state is supporting a lot of local implementation, but we are too. We have our technical assistance program. And so we've been helping a lot of communities implement in a variety of ways. We are providing direct technical assistance to a few of you, and that's been really nice. Some town meeting votes are coming up very soon in the communities that we've been working in over the past year. We also are doing some ad hoc technical assistance. So we know that not all communities have GIS capabilities, or they need some help with that compliance model testing. So we wanted to just remind you that we're here for you to help with that process as you're getting into the weeds of the technical compliance. We also know that the sub-regional spaces have been where you've been able to convene and talk about your, processes for MBTA communities and how you're thinking through customizing your zoning to meet the act. And then I think the secretary mentioned this, it came up during the Q&A, but we really prioritize making sure that affordability requirements or inclusionary zoning can apply to your 3A zoning, because we know that we want both market rate and affordable housing to be developed under this new state law. And so MAPC is already working with communities to conduct those economic feasibility assessments, and we're here to help. So if you are, wondering, can you apply your inclusionary zoning? Is it actually going to be feasible? Please reach out to me, because we are happy to help you to figure that out so that you can make sure that you get affordability into your zoning. And lastly, I did want to put a plug in for our district suitability tool that we released last week. So this is a tool that will be really helpful in both the 3A planning process, but also we hope that it can help as you're doing your housing production plans and other planning and housing work, because it's a really great tool to just understand where in your community is most suitable and ready for development. So with that, 3A is a great tool that's removing a lot of zoning barriers. And we also see the Affordable Homes Act as helping fund development that could happen under 3A. But there are a lot of other housing priorities in the Affordable Homes Act that align with the work that we're doing at MAPC, along with all of our cities and towns. So the secretary in his remarks did mention, disposition processes and leveraging that publicly owned land to create affordable housing. And that's something that we have worked with some of you on, helping you dispose of property for affordable housing and doing community visionings to help that process along. I wanted to put a plug in for the Metro Mayor's Coalition Housing Task Force. This is something that as a group, we're working with them to really understand best practices for how to do that process and how to identify sites that are most ready for that next development process. We also are working closely with our clean energy team to make sure that as new development happens, and especially new residential development, how can that be the most energy friendly and environmentally friendly, so that we can continue to work towards our climate goals in addition to our housing goals. And the last thing that I'll mention before we shift to Jesse is that one of the things that we're really excited about in the Affordable Homes Act that's kind of wonky is the Office of Fair Housing. It's something that's very bureaucratic, but we're really excited about it. And I wanted to plug that the housing team has started working more with communities to do fair housing plans and provide technical assistance to expand that fair housing work locally. And we hope to expand this into the future. So if you, are a community that's looking to do a little bit more fair housing work and want to connect with us, we encourage you to do that too. So just a little bit of a plug for the work that we're doing and how the Affordable Homes Act is connecting with the housing technical assistance work that we can provide. And now we'll shift it to Jessie so she can talk a little bit more about our housing research.
Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to see so many folks on the line. I'm Jessie Partridge-Guerrero. I'm the Interim Director of Data Services. And I'm going to share some research that we released late last fall, looking into speculation and investment in the housing market. I think this research really shows the critical need for some of the bold housing policies that Secretary Augustus spoke to this morning. It also reflects the experiences we heard in the chat of local municipalities experiencing this investor activity, really competing in the market against folks trying to buy a home to live in. So let me share my screen. So the headline from our research is that from 2004 to 2018, 1 in 5 residential properties in the MAPC region was purchased by an investor. For the purposes of this research, we defined investors a few different ways. Any LLC buyer, any buyer who purchased at least 3 residential properties within any 5-year window in our study period, any buyer whose total purchase amount totaled $3.5 million or more across the full study period, and any buyer of an apartment building with 4 or more units, assuming they're not buying those properties to live in. We also categorized investors by the size of their portfolios, ranging from small investors up to your institutional investors that have the largest portfolios. What we see when we look at the rates of investment over time and by building type is, first of all, that we see a rapid increase in the rate of investment around the Great Recession period. You can see in 2008, we see a peak in investment activity, and then it really levels off at that higher rate up to current years. We also see that investment is most likely to occur in 3-family or triple-decker properties. So you can see the darkest blue line there is triple-deckers, showing a rate of 50% investor purchases over in more recent years in the study period. 2 families also have a higher rate of investment at about 1/3. And then single families and condos are a little bit lower than the average, which is just above 20%. We also see that investors are more likely to purchase their properties with cash. There are some non-investors that purchase properties in cash. That's the gray bars in this chart, ranging from 12 to 23%, compared to investors in blue that are buying properties with cash at rates of up to 50%. Spatially, we see that investor activity is highest in our communities of color in the region and across the state. So you can see the darkest blue color represents investor activity at rates of 30% or higher. You can see neighborhoods of Roxbury, Dorchester in Boston, Southeast Framingham, Lynn, Chelsea, and outside the region in Lowell, Lawrence, and Brockton. So this investor activity is really having a disproportionate impact on communities of color in the region and across the state. We also looked into property flipping, which we've defined as any property that's purchased and resold within 2 years. And we see that 9% of sales across our study period were flipped. We see that investors are much more likely to flip properties than non-investors. So again, non-investors are in gray here, and then investors by size, ranging from small investors in the lightest blue up to institutional investors in purple. You can see that large and institutional investors are most likely to flip their properties. We also see that when investors flip their properties, they're reselling those properties for a lot more money than they paid for the property. So institutional investors in purple in this chart and all other investors in blue, they are reselling properties that they flip for upwards of 60 to 80% more than they paid for those properties. Whereas non-investors who do have some transactions that are purchased and resold within 2 years, they're reselling on average for 10 to 20% more than they paid for the property. So this investor flipping is really driving up prices in the home sale market. We have a number of recommendations as part of our full report, which I would encourage folks to check out. I'll share the link in a moment. We just wanted to highlight a few that really are complementary or even represented in the Affordable Homes Act and with Secretary Augustus's remarks this morning. The first one on this list is the only one that is actually not represented in the Affordable Homes Act. That's the Tenant Right of First Refusal, or TOPA, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, although we would love to see that policy incorporated into the Affordable Homes Act as it makes its way through the legislature. You heard Secretary Augustus speak to the transfer fee. We think this is really important, both for generating resources for municipalities who opt in to be able to develop affordable housing. It also may reduce speculation, in particular, some of that rapid flipping where investors might think twice before they resell in such a short period of time if they have that fee. Of course, we recommend and really appreciate all of the revenue in the bond bill for production of affordable housing, for public housing, for moderate income housing. We recommend, as is seen as in the bond bill, first-time homebuyer assistance so that folks trying to get a foothold in the home sale market can have a chance to compete with these cash-rich investors. And then a lot of housing stability protections that we recommend, including foreclosure protections, our amazing RAFT Emergency Rental Assistance Program and the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program. So with that, you can read more about all of these recommendations on our website, homesforprofit.mapc.org. We also wanted to share links, and we'll put them in the chat, to some other related housing research and resources. We do a lot of housing research at MAPC, and of course, our housing team and government affairs team develop a lot of resources for you all as you're doing your housing work. I wanted to highlight, we just updated some research that we published a few years ago on the relationship, or really what we find lack of relationship, between housing development and school enrollment. So that is, I know, a topic that comes up all the time, especially in 3A conversations lately. So we hope that can be a useful research resource. We also have Living Little, which it helps municipalities think about how they might consider smaller housing typologies in their municipalities, including ADUs. And as Andrea mentioned, our 3A district suitability analysis tool, which we just released recently, which we hope can really help municipalities as you're thinking about where to site your 3A districts in a way that's going to be most effective. And of course, our Metro Common 2050 plan has a lot on housing and other related policy. So with that, thank you from all of us, and I hope we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Great. Thank you, Leah, Jesse, and Andrea for your update and information. We do have about 7 minutes for questions. So again, we're going to utilize the chat, and I'll just so hopefully we can get people to write questions in the chat, either policy, advocacy, or any of the housing research would be really helpful. I guess we'll start. I'll start. Why not, right? Jesse, what is a data piece that you found the most surprising? What is the data piece you found the most surprising within, like, the data services team research?
Well, we do so much research, but just speaking to this Homes for Profit research, you know, I think we set out to do this research because we had been hearing over and over that investment is a challenge for municipalities, for community-based organizations, and the tenants that they serve. And so we really wanted to, you know, as we do, put data behind that lived experience to help folks advocate for responses to that activity. I think, so we were expecting to see that investor activity was happening. I think 1 in 5 has shocked some of us. I also think seeing in that last chart I showed that really big difference in resale price of flipped properties when they are being flipped by investors compared to non-investors. We don't have data to understand how much money investors or non-investors are putting into those properties they're flipping. But regardless of how much they're, you know, renovating or putting, you know, paint in or whatever they're doing, that's really driving up prices in the market. So those were a few. I mean, I think also just really important to point out the high rates of investment in communities of color, and to point out the impact that that is having both for tenants and for folks trying to get into the home sale market. and sorry, I'm just renaming everything because I think it's all really interesting, but the very high rates of investment in triple deckers and two-family properties, those traditionally have been meant for families to purchase and have a unit for their children's families and maybe one unit of rental income. And it's really almost impossible for folks to get into that type of market the way they did generations ago.
Great,
Thanks,
thank
Erin.
you. And thank you for those who are starting to put their questions in the chat. We're going to try and get through all of them. One question from the city of Medford. We have a strong belief that this issue of investor purchases has skyrocketed in the last 2 to 3 years. Is there someone or a group of someone's looking at an addendum of more recent years for this report?
Yeah, so the reason that we have that 2018 cutoff is because of the way we've defined investors. You know, a lot of researchers only look at LLC buyers when they're talking about investors, but we had a sense that that wasn't going to capture the full picture. So we included that both the number of transactions. So if a buyer has purchased 3 or more properties within any 5-year window, we count them as an investor, and then also that sale price. But because of that 5-year window, we had to cut off the reporting at 2018. So then the data we have actually go through 2022, and we just purchased 2023 data from the Warren Group. So we are in the process of updating, so we'll at least be able to add in 2019. There is one chart, if you look at the website, that shows investor activity by the type, the investor type. And so that includes data through 2022 for value investors based on the total purchase price and for LLCs. So that you might check out just to get a sense for how those trends have looked in the most recent years.
Great. And kind of talking about that investor properties, another question from the chat. When you talk about flip properties, or, you know, those flip properties, are you including when an existing home is torn down in a new larger home is built, or is it just when, are we talking about like sale of property here?
That's a great question. I can't answer it definitively. The way that we look at flip properties is based on the address of the parcel. So we have, 20 years of data, and we look at each year to find those similar or those same addresses to see when they're resold. So if a property is torn down and then mansionized, if it has the same street address, we will be capturing it. It could be, though, that street address changes. And the same is true for condo conversions. Any, multifamily properties that are converted to condos, we may or may not be capturing. So that's actually research that we're interested in pursuing to get a little bit more fine-grained on that flip rate.
Great, thank you. And I guess kind of related to that, I'm kind of skipping around on the questions because there's like a flow here. For smaller multifamily, meaning, like an example, like, a 3-family, the cost to purchase the entire building would be prohibitive for most first-time home buyers. Are there other ways to support non-investor purchases to be able to compete?
Well, I can take a first pass at this question, but I do think Leah or Andrea might have other insight just based on the policy side. I think you're right. It is harder to purchase, obviously, a larger building. There are programs specifically out there. I know the city of Boston has a program to provide incentives for folks who plan to be owner-occupied landlords to really help folks get in the door for one of those more expensive properties, but also if I believe there's that they have to keep those tenant units at a reasonably affordable rate. So it kind of helps on both the homeowner side and the rental side. But I'd be curious to hear from Leah or Andrea if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, I can jump in related to that. One of the exciting tax cuts that was just approved by the administration in October is to expand this idea of giving a tax cut for kind of good landlords. So people who are keeping rents below market rate. And so I think that there's an opportunity for both Boston to refine their programs, but then also for other cities and towns to think about how they can further incentivize people who maybe do want to buy a 2-family or a 3-family and have rentals and the other units live in the other unit, and try to keep them somewhat affordable and get a little bit money for doing that as a community good.
I think so. There's a couple programs that exist for first-time home buyers in terms of, supports that are being offered to them and guidance on mortgages. And I think supporting those programs is something that will ultimately help first-time home buyers be able to compete, because we're seeing also a huge difference in the amount of knowledge about how the housing market operates. So how do we help first-time home buyers be ready for the sometimes quick process, sometimes slow process, and just being ready for the time variety that happens in the housing market. And then, as Jesse mentioned, one of the findings in the report was looking at the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, so that that proposal that we're having lots of conversations about with legislators this session would make it so that the tenants in the building could come together to do that purchase, or to bring in a nonprofit housing developer to do the purchase with them, so that they can stay in that property when there's a sale being considered. So those are some ideas that we've been working on. And some of these programs are funded in the fiscal budget, which we know is going to be a very tight conversation this year, which is why the Affordable Homes Act and those larger investments that are coming out of the bond cap are even more important.
Well, we are at time, actually 2 minutes over time, but that's okay. But thank you so much, Jesse, Leah, and Andrea, for entertaining us with answers. And I, encourage you to obviously read up on the chat, because we didn't get to all the questions and answers, and hopefully that'll produce future data or projects or even technical assistance moving forward that MAPC can continue to explore. So thank you so much, all three of you.
Thank you.
Great. Now back to my notes. So right now we're going to transition to the business meeting. I know everyone's favorite part of council meetings. The great news is quorum has been reached and exceeded. But I do still want to ask everyone for your patience and cooperation as we move through the agenda. Because quorum is reached, we can just proceed with the business portion. As you have entered, the reason we do a waiting room is MAPC staff notes council members on the way in, just like we do in person. So your attendance is counted and counted toward quorum. So we don't need to do attendance like we have previously. And the great thing is that it's basically the same result. So I just want to do a quick introduction for council meeting norms. This open meeting of the MAPC Council is being conducted remotely, consistent with the supplemental budget bill, which Governor Healy signed into law on March 29th, 2023. Among other things, this bill extends the temporary provisions pertaining to the open meeting law to March 31st, 2025. Specifically, this further extension allows public bodies to hold meetings remotely without a quorum of the public body physically present at a meeting location, and to provide adequate alternative access to remote meetings. The language does not make any substantive changes to the open meeting law other than extending the expiration date of the temporary provisions regarding remote meetings from March 31st, 2023 to March 31st, 2025. And hopefully we can get some legislation passed so I don't have to read that paragraph at every virtual meeting. Now, that is just my aside, but it's still important if anyone's listening. The public may view the proceedings live streamed at www.youtube.com/user/MAPC Metro Boston. For this meeting, the MAPC Council is convening its members by video conference via Zoom. council members receive their login credentials when registering for this meeting. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that most council members are participating by video conferencing. Accordingly, please be aware that if you share your video, we can see you as much as you can see us. And I hope you do share your screen because no one likes to be the only one on screen. And this recording of this meeting will be posted to the MAPC website as soon as practical. All right. Now we're going to turn to the first item on the business agenda. But before we do, allow me to cover a few ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. Please remember that your phone or computer should be muted, which we already handled for you, unless you are asked to speak, called on to speak. Please remember that we'll be utilizing the Zoom chat feature right down here for all motions, seconds, and votes. To facilitate the vote tally, council members voting aye are asked to vote first, followed by the nays and abstentions. Council members who are on the telephone will vote orally and will be unmuted to vote. Voting by phone participants will be oral and will occur after all other votes have been voted on for a given motion. The votes will be tallied for the minutes and maintained as public record. Phew. All right. So first up on the agenda, and I will do my best, if you have a question in the chat, I will do my best to clarify or answer. Also, if you haven't done so already, council members, if you could put your name and affiliation identified. It's the 3 buttons. If you go to your picture on your screen, even if you don't share your screen or share your video, it's the 3 dots and then click rename. And if you could just do, like, for instance, for me, I did Erin Wortman, comma, Stoneham. You could do Town of Stoneham. Well, don't do Town of Stoneham, that's mine. But as a delegate, I just want to make sure I am identifiable for voting and for the minutes. MAPC staff does the minutes and they do a great job. And I want to make it as easy for them as possible. Great. Thank you so much for allowing me to just talk about all logistics. So next up is the approval of minutes for the fall 2023 council meeting. I'm going to ask for a single motion to approve the minutes of the fall 2023 council meeting. In the chat Zoom feature, I'm going to ask for a motion. So if you could just type a motion. Oh, okay. Thank you, Yolanda. Yolanda has made the motion to approve the 2023 council minutes. And I'm going to say Tina Cassidy made that second. So with that, if there are no questions or comments on that, I'm going to ask for aye votes first at this time. You guys are like old hat here. Can hardly tell it's been almost 4 years since COVID, right? All right. And I will get to, I see Katie, you have your hand up. So just hold tight real quick. All right.
We ask people to put it in the chat.
Yes, Katie, if that's okay with you.
Aye, nay, or abstain.
Yes, please. Any nays or abstention? Oh, okay. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Mark, for the clarification. Yes, we are doing all votes in the chat. So just do. Great. And it looks like everyone has, oops. I need to vote myself. All right, it looks like everyone has voted who wishes to vote. And I see it, I will say the motion has carried. Thank you so much for that. All right, next up on the agenda is the report of the treasurer, Sam Seidel, MAPC Council Treasurer. Take it away, Sam.
Thank you, President Aaron. Hello to everybody. I'm Sam Seidel. I am the treasurer. And I give a report out at the council meeting. And this meeting, we're going to do we have 2 items on the agenda. One is the mid-year budget. We'll take that first. And then second is the proposed municipal assessment, which we'll take next. Hopefully both for approval by the full council, which is what we're doing here today. I'm going to start with the mid-year budget and basically just say that this is something we do every year around this time. We go through the first half of the year using the initial budget that we develop in May. And then at about this time, we have about 6 months under our belt. Those are actual numbers. We can see where we're actually at. And then we make any small adjustments at this point so that, to use the phrase, we can land the plane successfully in June. You received in your packet a summary budget, which I have in front of me on a piece of paper. Hopefully you can find yours. And what I'm going to do is just walk through it very quickly. It's the sort of 30,000.
Also possible, Sam, for Anna to share it if you want.
If we feel that's helpful for people, we could put it up on the screen. It saves me from having to see myself on the screen, but either way is fine. And if not, I'm not making a strong recommendation one way or the other. So maybe I'll just walk through it. If there are questions or somebody would really like to have it up on the screen, we certainly can do that. But why don't I just walk us through some of these numbers, just so you can get a flavor of where we're at and what we're looking at. If you look at your summary budget, I'm just going to make a couple of sort of general points. If you look at the top line, our revenue is down about 5%. That is really an adjustment. This budget is always just an adjustment. And it reflects that we did receive a large federal highway grant. But instead of that work being done at MAPC, it's been moved over to CTPS, our sister agency that focuses on transportation. So that money is coming off of our budget and it's going onto their budget. And also Homeland Security grants, which we get every year and we distribute. Those always run a little bit late. We're not going to get to all the funding, partly because the federal government isn't going to distribute all the funding by the end of this fiscal year. So we're reducing that on this mid-year budget. And the line below that is our non-staff project costs. That's pass-through money. That's money that comes in and goes out the door. And that is also reflected in that Homeland Security grant money that is just going to be delayed, deferred to future out years. A couple of other points to make. If we go down the sheet a little bit, our operating expenses are down slightly on direct labor. And that is in part because we have fewer interns and also in part because we have a slightly higher vacancy rate than we were hoping for, but it's hard to keep fully staffed up. It's a tight labor market and we are constantly working on those issues. And below that, you'll see admin labor, which are positions in the agency that bill to an administrative account rather than to direct client work. Those are down as well. That's for similar reasons. We hired a lawyer a little bit later in the year than we were expecting, and so that money is less of an expenditure than we were expecting. And there's also a deputy level position that has not yet been filled. So we're still looking at that. We'll go down the sheet a little bit further under operational services. That number is down as well. The reasoning there is that we're in this hybrid work mode. I'm sure a lot of you are as well. Some working from home, some working in the office, depending on the day of the week. It actually is costing less than we expected to keep the office up and running. Fewer resources needed, fewer paper, less paper, fewer ink cartridges, et cetera. So that number is down. Interest income has been strong. Interest rates are high. We heard that earlier in our housing discussion. And finally, two other points to make. We have excess revenue to be realized in future out years, FY25. That number is going up slightly. That is just an expression of the fact that there is plenty of work going on at MAPC. And it's just the challenge that the agency faces is to have enough people on task working on these projects to get it done. And we're going to push out about $76,000 into a future out year. That's a challenge that you'd want to have. It just means that we're set up well for next year as well, but we won't get to all that work in this next 6 months. We're going to hold our overhead rate steady, constant. That's our sort of temperature gauge about how we're doing, and that's a good sign for the agency. That really concludes the overhead budget. The agency continues to do all its great work from its digital divide work, its housing work, to all the individual projects they're working on with all of you in your communities. The list is literally too long to list, and that's why we don't list it here. But anybody at the agency can tell you all about all the specific projects that are going on. The final thing I'll say is that Anna Cole and the finance team do all this work, and we appreciate them hugely. They keep me informed as to what's going on, and that the executive committee reviewed this mid-year budget and approved it for the full council with a recommendation for adoption. With that, the treasurer concludes this portion of his report, and open it up to any questions, or if Erin, do you want to lead us in a vote on this? If we're at
Or
that?
I can, but I want to, thank you, Tabor. Tabor has a motion to approve.
Thank
And
you,
as long
Tabor.
as there's no, okay, and John DePriest does a second. Great. So at this time, if there's no questions, which I'm not seeing any, so that's always a good sign for that. If the ayes could type aye in the chat. Look how quick you all are. Amazing. Thank you. Oh, I can't forget to vote. Sam, don't forget to vote.
I just voted.
Great. And the nays or abstentions? Just going to give it 2 more seconds. I'm going to call it as motion carries. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the finance team. Thank you to Sam for the adoption of the mid-year FY24 budget. I see Mark has come off mute. Did you have something to say? Oh, okay.
No, I think we're continuing with Sam on his next agenda
Yes.
item.
Yep, for sure. I just wanted to make sure. Great. All right, Sam, next item.
All right, so the next item that we are going to take up is something we do also this time every year, and that's the adoption of the FY25, so the upcoming year proposed municipal assessment. You should have a sheet with the numbers on it for all the communities, cities and towns in the MAPC region. It represents the 2.5% increase as adjusted by population. And that came in your packet. I really don't, there's no comment here to make, except that it's something that we fill into our budget as we go into our full year FY25 budget process, which we're going to start very soon. These are our most flexible dollars, and they are the ones that we can deploy first with any task that you assign to this agency. So we view these sources of revenue as very useful and valuable to the agency. With that, I conclude that portion of my presentation.
Thank you, Sam. I do want to give a quick update to the full council. Typically, the executive committee reviews, and at their meeting prior to this meeting, we typically review and vote endorsement or recommendation to the council. At our latest executive committee meeting, the executive committee instead decided to ask the officers to review and vote on a recommendation, which we did prior to this meeting. And I'm happy to report that the officers met, discussed, and offers a unanimous recommendation for adoption to the full council. The full council is the authority in which to authorize this request. So that is why it's before you today. But I did want to kind of give that precursor. And I see that Mo Handel of Needham and has motioned to accept let me word this correctly, to approve the FY25 MAPC assessment with Tabor Keeley of Milton seconding. I am not seeing any questions. Ayes first, please. Vote away to those council members. Thank you for that. And if there's any nays or abstentions, please do so at this time. Just want to make sure I have everyone's vote. It looks like we have a pause. Motion passes with 2 abstentions, one from Juan Vega and one from Vandana Rao. If I missed anyone's abstention, please let me know, or in a dissenting vote, please let me know. Okay, great. Well, congratulations. That has passed. Thank you so much, Sam, and the finance team again. There's always time for a thank you. So thank you for all your hard work. I know we've had a lot of discussions in executive committee and in officers about both items, and I really appreciate all the hard work that goes into making votes like this really easy.
And the
or
finance
appearing to
committee
look
too,
very
right?
easy.
I just want to recognize the finance committee too, that works very hard on these issues as well.
For sure. Thank you so much. I'm glad you guys do it, so we don't have to. Okay, great. All right, next up on the agenda is the report of the executive director, Mark Grayson. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Thank you, Sam, for presentations, and thank you to the entire council for successfully voting in our mid-year budget and our municipal assessment for FY25. We really appreciate it. We know it's a sign of confidence in the work that all of our staff are doing, both in the project and the policy arena, and we thank you for that. In this report, I want to be fairly brief and cover a few things. I was going to speak about some housing issues. A lot of those have been covered, of course, by the secretary and by the panel. But actually, I wanted to point out a couple of things related to a few of the questions that we didn't get to, because I think that there were really some great questions there. And I wanted to try and provide a little bit of an answer on some of them. Phil Giffey, my good friend Phil for many years, from Neighborhood of Affordable Housing in East Boston, asked about the Climate Bank and whether or not the Affordable Homes Act was connected to the Climate Bank. It isn't directly related to the Climate Bank. Crystal Cornegay and Maggie Superchurch at Mass Housing are in the process of developing the details of the Climate Bank. We have been in pretty constant time. Lizzie Wayand, who's not with us today, but is obviously our deputy executive director, attended, I think, almost a day-long planning session for the Climate Bank, and it is moving forward. Moving forward for the Climate Bank means a couple of things. It not only means how do you spend the money, it also means how do you fully capitalize the bank, because the bank is authorized, it has some resources, but it is not fully capitalized at this point in time. And that's something we're very much looking toward. One of the things that we are focusing on at MAPC in the climate arena, and this will get back to the bank in a moment, is the question of how we decarbonize the existing building stock. There has been a lot of attention, particularly in certain cities and towns, including some of those on this screen, about the issue of developing fossil fuel free or net no carbon buildings that are being built today. And that is a very important and relevant discussion. But sometimes I feel it gets a little bit too much attention, because in 2050, when we have to meet our climate goals that are in statute in the state, 80 to 85% of the buildings that will be around in 2050 are around today. They're already on the ground. And the older they are, the less efficient they tend to be, and the more carbon they tend to throw off. So unless we're going to focus a lot on the decarbonization of existing structures, we're never going to meet those goals. And sometimes I feel like the existing structures are just a little bit less sexy than the new buildings, and a little less likely to get a lot of public attention, both at the local level and at the state level. But we are paying attention to them at MAPC. We think this is going to be an important action for the Climate Bank. I know that the folks at Mass Housing agree with that. And we worked very hard with Secretary Augustus, Lieutenant Governor, and others in the administration to make sure that there was a portion of the Affordable Homes Act that specifically relates to decarbonization of existing structures. And that was $150 million that they put into the affordable housing bill explicitly for the decarbonization of existing state-funded public housing in so many of your communities. Now, MAPC is going a step further than that. Well, that's state-funded public housing, but what about all the federally funded public housing? So we are filing a climate pollution reduction grant. Sorry for all these acronyms, CPRG. We are filing that with the EPA on April 1st, together with the cities of Boston, Lowell, and Chelsea, to see if they will help to fund about $1 worth of decarbonization of existing federally funded public housing, some of the most energy inefficient buildings in our cities and towns, particularly in those cities. We are also working as part of that grant to develop a community of practice that will involve not just public housing authorities, but all of our cities and towns and people involved in affordable housing of all types, not just public housing, to see what we as a community of practice can learn about decarbonization and try and apply more broadly throughout the field. We have also been trying and will continue to try to get additional decarbonization resources into the economic development bond bill. That didn't make it to the, didn't make the cut with the administration, but we're going to continue to try with the administration and with the legislature to see if we can add decarbonization resources. Again, not just for public housing. In this case, we're thinking of single family homes in need of decarbonization. That would, if it were included, be funded through the Climate Bank, at least in part. And also the decarbonization of small commercial structures in gateway cities and environmental justice communities. So we're going to try and see if we can get that into the economic development bond bill or into another vehicle. So the overall point I'm trying to make here is that our housing work and our climate work are very closely intertwined. As Lizzie often says, you can't set one up against the other. We have to do them both. They are both important objectives, and we are pursuing them aggressively at MAPC. I wanted to mention just two other things in addition to our climate and housing work that we are working on at MAPC that I think is particularly important and relevant to the moment. One is the question of the digital divide. Often, I think people have the perspective when we talk about the digital divide, when we talk about digital equity, when we talk about a lack of broadband capacity, people think that just means rural parts of Massachusetts or rural parts of the country. And it's true. The rural areas have a significant hill to climb in that regard. And there's a lot of work going on there in Franklin County, in Hampshire County, in Berkshire County, and other places, often led by our sister regional planning agencies to address broadband needs in rural areas. But that is not the only area where we lack effective Wi-Fi service. We lack it there are dead zones in most of our cities and many of our towns. There are public housing and subsidized housing developments that do not have adequate Wi-Fi service. There are even schools and libraries where students do not have adequate Wi-Fi service. And we have a tremendous team. It's a combined team of our data services folks, I think 4 people in data services and 3 people in municipal collaboration who are working tirelessly on the digital equity question. And they are focusing on public and subsidized housing in our communities. They are also helping individual communities to develop plans for expanding and improving Wi-Fi service throughout their communities, not only in public and subsidized housing. We have been working on all of these efforts with Revere, with Watertown, with Somerville, with Quincy, with Chelsea. Those are only a few that I can think of off the top of my head. And I view it as a very important part of our work. A lot of it is funded by the Mass Broadband Institute, and we're very grateful to MBI for their partnership with us and with other regional planning agencies to address this critical equity and educational and communication issue throughout Massachusetts, and especially in our region. The last thing I'll want to mention is we had a very successful and moving kickoff on Valentine's Day, actually, at the Federal Reserve Bank of really what is the second phase of our efforts to help municipalities to address issues of equity and inclusion in their communities. As many of you know, shortly after the murder of George Floyd and others, we instituted a program here at MAPC that we called REMAP. And the REMAP program was to help individual communities to develop actionable plans within their communities to address longstanding issues of equity and inclusion, particularly focused on race. We had a competitive process. 22 communities applied to participate. We were able to choose and fund 6 of them. And we had a 2-year program with those communities involving training and plan development with our partners at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and the Government Alliance for Race and Equity, GARE, which is based in Oakland, but does work nationally. And I view it as a successful program. It wasn't without its challenges or hiccups. But one of the things we certainly dealt with there, as so many of you on the screen know, is rapid turnover, not only at MAPC, but there's been rapid turnover in municipal government. And that made it a little harder to effectively run a program of this kind. But we got over the finish line, developed some great plans. A lot of them are being implemented. And we really feel we trained and taught people, and they trained and taught each other to talk about some very difficult subjects and make some progress. So we decided to somewhat tweak the program and do it again. This time, the Fed has given us some resources, but they're on to some other things. They're no longer a direct partner in the program, but we're still working with GARE. And this time, we received 11 applications, and we were able to fund them all. Most of them are in the MAPC region. There are a few that are from other parts of the state. We call the program REACH. And it started off with its first training session on Valentine's Day, as I said, at the Fed, which generously allowed us to use their space. You know, we're in a difficult and interesting time in America today. There was a tremendous amount of attention to issues of race and equity a couple of years back. There's also been backlash and reaction. And there's also been a tendency to just move away from some of those issues and feel like, well, maybe they're a little too hot to handle. Maybe we paid too much attention to them. Maybe we shouldn't bother. Maybe we should wait a few more years and see if we can bring it up again. I have to be honest, that's not the perspective in this organization. We believe that issues of race, equity, and inclusion in America are critical issues. They're historically important. They're important at the moment. And we want to continue to address them with our partners in the administration, in the legislature, and in municipal government. And the REACH program is an indication of our ongoing commitment to these issues. And we're so pleased that 11 communities have chosen to join us and are working on this endeavor. On our staff, Raul Gonzalez and Ben Faust lead this effort. I want to thank and congratulate them. We're looking forward to a very successful year in that arena. Madam President, that concludes my report.
Thank you so much, Mark. Great report as always. Next up on the agenda, I'm calling on Mark again, but this is honestly one of my favorite items, always on the winter council agenda. Disregard my phone ringing. That's just what happens. So I'm going to call Mark for the announcement of the Robert Davidson Staff Award and the Above and Beyond Awards. Mark, take it away.
Thank you very much, Erin. Every year, MAPC awards the Robert Davidson Staff Appreciation Award to a superb member of our staff who works collaboratively with other members of the staff and effectively with our members, our municipal members, and conducts regional activities, not only with those municipalities, but with many other allies and contacts throughout the region. And the nominations come from our staff. You have to have been at MAPC at least 3 years and not be a previous recipient of the award. And we always have great people who we are able to honor through this award, which is named after, I believe, the first executive director of MAPC, Robert Davidson. This year, I am pleased to announce that the recipient of the Robert Davidson Award is Allison Felix, a principal planner and emerging technologies expert or specialist in our transportation department. Allison is on the line. I want to recognize you. We are going to make the presentation of all of these awards at our May council meeting, because that will be in person. And I just happen to believe that giving people awards virtually is kind of a downer. But we did want to announce today that award and heartily congratulate Allison for being the recipient. We also have established a new award today, and that award we are calling the Above and Beyond Award. And we have decided to make this award to two of our staff members, our General Counsel, Marjorie Weinberger, and our Manager of Information Technology, Buddy Newman, both of whom are on the screen today as well. As some of you may know, although we did not scream it from the rooftops, back in the middle of November, we suffered a cyber attack at MAPC. And it was a very difficult and challenging period. We came through it well, thankfully, but it's very tough to go through. I am absolutely sure there are people on the screen who have gone through that either with their municipality or personally or with another organization maybe that they serve on the board of or are involved in. Buddy and Margie started over the weekend basically working full-time, nights, days, weekends on this issue. We assembled a great team that involved external support from our insurance company, from a specialty law firm in this arena, and from forensic experts. But that all had to be coordinated and managed. And Buddy and Margie really served as the point of contact between all of our staff members and everyone else who isn't on staff, who uses and gets involved with our IT systems and those three expert groups. And even today, Buddy particularly is continuing to work on re-standing up MAPC's systems. Most of them are operating just fine. A few of them we're still in the process of honing and finishing up. That's the spirit at MAPC, really. When people need to jump in, when there's a crisis, whether it's at MAPC or with our cities and towns, we jump in and we do what has to be done. We certainly saw that during the pandemic, Lord knows, and on a smaller scale, we saw it with this issue now. So I wanted to very much thank Buddy and Margie for their commitments and their commitment and their efforts. And we will also be presenting the Above and Beyond Award to you in person at the end of May at our annual council meeting. Thank you both. Erin, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I love the surprise. I don't know. I kind of like seeing it on Zoom because I can really see the surprise look, and that was very much a surprise. And what a great surprise. Allison, Margie, Buddy, congratulations. I can't wait to celebrate formally with you all at the annual council meeting this May, which is my reminder for everyone to stay tuned. That our annual council meeting will be held at the end of May. You can expect it right after Memorial Day, probably Wednesday or Thursday of that week, which we hope to make an in-person event. Mark, is there other business not known at the time of the posting of this agenda?
If there is, I do not know it.
It is still unknown if it exists. Correct. All right, great. So I'm going to ask at this time a motion to adjourn the winter council meeting. Sharonda, we don't know the date yet, so stay tuned. Hopefully we'll announce it very shortly. So Imai of Weston has moved and Tina Cassidy has seconded that motion from Woburn. All right, all those in favor say aye. And I'll take opposed and abstentions at this time. And with that, the motion passes and the winter council meeting is going to be adjourned at 10:39 a.m. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you all for participating and have a great one. And I will see you soon.